There has been a significant drop in the cases of child marriages over the past decade. UNICEF says 25 million child marriages were prevented in the last decade. But even with decline, some 12 million girls are married every year across the globe.
20% of all underage marriages take place in India, more than any other country. But the problem isn't just overseas. It reaches as far as the United States. Here to discuss is Fraidy Reiss. She's the founder of Unchained At Last, a nonprofit dedicated to women forced into marriage. Good to see you.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, Fraidy, let's talk about this sharp decline in child marriages first. What are the causes for that?
I think we still don't know. We have to determine what is causing this decline and make sure that whatever it is, we're continuing to do so that the numbers continue to decline. What we can't do, though, is become complacent. And we can't say, well, numbers are declining, so this isn't a problem anymore. This is still a significant problem, still affecting millions of girls around the world, and we need to do something about this.
You say millions of girls around the world, and I know there's a tendency to think this is a problem in perhaps developing countries. You know, we talked about India. But if you look at some of the laws on the books right here in the United States, it's legal for a girl underage to be married. Often, many times they need their parents' consent, but it happens here.
Right now, marriage before 18 is legal in all 50 states, and in fact, 25 states' laws do not specify any minimum age for marriage, which puts those laws in line with laws in Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Yemen.
So that, I think for a lot of people, that is surprising. What's the cause behind that, and what is so difficult about changing the laws to just ensure that if you're 18, you can be married, but not below? I mean, it's just remarkable.
Well, in a lot of cases, what I think is happening here is these are archaic laws that have been on the books for a long time. They hark back to a very different time when a woman or a girl really had no other prospects. Marriage was the only future. And unfortunately, now that I've brought this to legislators' attention, we at Unchained At Last and other organizations are working really hard, trying to go state to state and pass very simple common sense legislation that eliminates the current loopholes that allow marriage before 18 in every state. And unfortunately, legislators have been extremely resistant to passing this legislation.
And I should point out to our viewers that it's not, I mean, the states here, some of them, I mean, for example, New Hampshire, it's 13 for a girl.
She said some don't have a minimum at all.
Yeah, and 14 for boys. Alaska, North Carolina, it's age 14. I just can't imagine that it wouldn't be a slam dunk for a politician to say, you know what, let's fix this.
The U.S. State Department considers marriage before 18 a human rights abuse. So I agree with you. I thought when I first started this was going to be a slam dunk. And in state after state, what legislators have said is, well, if a girl gets pregnant, she's got to get married.
So wait, the thing I was going to say is what is remarkable about this statistic and these statistics is that the United States and even we as reporters go around the world and we do these stories on forced childhood marriage. Maybe the difference is perhaps in some of these countries that children are forced into marriage, and here this is just the law that states that you can be 14 years old to be married. But I don't know what kind of agency a 13 or a 14-year-old has.
Well, they don't, and often they need their parents' permission. Their parents are part of the process. We're talking a lot about girls and the impact on girls, but I was curious about boys too. I mean, is this an issue too? They're marrying someone.
So what we at Unchained At Last did is we retrieved the data from across the United States for the period of 2000 to 2010. And what we discovered is in just the 38 states that track the marriage ages, more than 167,000 children were married. We estimate in that decade approximately 248,000 children were married. Almost all were girls married to adult men.
Wow.
And when you talk about agency, even a 17-year-old doesn't have agency. We talk about forced marriage. Here's the problem with marriage before age 18, even a day before 18. These girls and boys do not have agency because typically in most U.S. states you don't become an adult until 18.
I was going to say, I mean, if you're underage, in other words, if you're not 18 years old, you can't vote. You can't buy alcohol. I mean, there's so many things that you can't do, but you can be married and give birth to children when you're a child yourself.
And here's the other thing you can't do. You can't say no to a marriage either before it happens or once you're already in it. Because the ways that we help women 18 or older who call us and say, please help me, my parents are forcing me to marry, or they've already forced me to marry, I want to get out. We help them to leave home. Often they're not safe at home. We help them get into a domestic violence shelter. We get them free legal representation for all the legal needs that they have. You can't do any of that before you're 18, where if you leave home, you're considered a runaway typically. The police will drag you back home. They might even charge me criminally for helping, which has happened. In one of the cases that we worked on, one of our volunteers was charged criminally for helping a girl to escape a forced marriage. Wow. Domestic violence shelters will not take girls in before 18 typically. And we had a shelter once tell us, a girl is turning 18 tomorrow, bring her back tomorrow, they said.
I don't understand, though, how, so is there a delicate dance that needs to happen between politicians and the freedom of religion in this country? Because many of the people who perhaps choose to marry their children off at such a young age, they might cite religious reasons, and this happens across.
But is that the case? Are we seeing very religious people doing this, or what do you find with your numbers?
The data from across the U.S. did not have identifying information about the children, so we don't know the full extent of where this is happening and when it's happening. Anecdotally, though, we know that the girls who reach out to us for help and the women who reach out and say this happened to them, they come from many different backgrounds, and sometimes it's religious, sometimes it's not, and then there's almost every religion, every major religion, minor religions. I mean, this is not happening in just one area, but really the religious community has come out strongly to support legislation to end child marriage. There is no religion that I know of that requires child marriage, and in fact, if you think about it, ending child marriage is entirely consistent with modern religious views. Modern religions view marriage as an important union between two willing partners. Child marriage, exactly, because child marriage is often forced, and it almost never lasts. 70 to 80% of marriages before 18 end in divorce.
I also don't understand, I'm not a lawyer, but how can you have laws in the book that state that an adult man cannot, or even an adult cannot have any kind of relationship with a minor? Right? It's considered statutory rape, and there's a whole bunch of laws against that, but you can marry somebody who's 14 years old. I just don't maybe there's a lawyer who can explain that. I don't know if you are, but what's the rationale there? Well,
I am not a lawyer, but I can tell you there is no rationale, because what happens is in some states, marriage is an exception under statutory rape laws. So that means we're handing these adult men a get-out-of-jail-free card. Now you can go at home and rape this girl, and it's no longer considered rape. And in some states, marriage is not an exception, which means the marriages are legal, but every time the couple has sex, the adult spouse is committing rape.
So listen, you talked about, during a different era, this was, the best way for a woman to sort of get out of the situation she's in or whatever. But we're living in different times. But in many of these states, parental consent is required before they can get married. What justification do the parents have? What scenarios are you finding popping up over and over again? Is it pregnancy?
Well, first I want to be clear that when we talk about parental consent, what I have seen is that in many cases that's actually parental coercion. And the two main reasons that I've seen, and this is just anecdotal, not based on any studies, the two main reasons I've seen that parents will force their child into a marriage before the age of 18 is one, as you said, pregnancy. A girl gets pregnant, a lot of parents still think the only possible response, even if she's been raped, is marriage. And even if she doesn't want it, even though studies show that she has much better long-term outcomes as a pregnant teenage girl if she stays single than if she marries. The other major reason that we've seen is immigration. Shockingly, the United States does not set a minimum age to petition for a foreign spouse or fiancé, also no minimum age to be the beneficiary of a spousal or fiancé visa. So we see young girls forced to marry adult men overseas so that these men can now get a U.S. visa.
Now, that is interesting.
That is very interesting.
There's so many components of this. I just want to, we're talking about child marriage going down, and I'm looking at this study right here from the Center for Law and Social Policy found that teen marriages in the U.S. actually jumped 50% in the 1990s. That seems also sort of counterintuitive. Do you know why that would happen?
We don't know. And what you do see, though, when you look at the last decade, the decade that we got the data for, 2000 to 2010, there was a decrease in child marriages in the United States. It's really hard to know. So little attention has been paid to this, and so much more research still needs to be done. What we do know unequivocally is every single state still allows this human rights abuse, and it will not go away until every state changes its laws.
Fraidy, how did you get involved in this?
I founded Unchained At Last because of my own traumatic experience. I was forced to marry when I was 19 and then forced to stay in that marriage, even though it was abusive from the first week, for 15 years. And therefore, after I finally managed to escape, I founded Unchained At Last to help other women who were escaping in the United States from a forced marriage. And very early on realized there's no way for me to help these girls under 18 who are reaching out and begging for help. And that's why I took on this additional little project of ending child marriage.
It's not a little project. It's an important one. And I wonder what challenges you face, because it's very, very difficult to you know, we think about our children and how we are generally very protective of them in terms of outsiders and in terms of how people tell us how to raise our children. This is a very delicate decision that happens between families. And how does your organization sort of bridge perhaps that really big divide?
Well, so we help only the women and girls who reach out to us and ask for help.
You're not looking at cases and saying, we have to go in and rescue those children.
We have never approached somebody. And in fact, sometimes we get a call from someone saying, my sister needs help, my friend needs help, my cousin needs help. And our response is, your friend, your sister, your cousin needs to call us.
Right.
So those who call and ask for help, we almost never deal with families unless the families find out that we're involved. And sometimes, unfortunately, we get threats and other unpleasant communications. Wow. But we deal directly with the survivor, and we let her choose what she wants to do. We have some women and girls who reach out and say, this is what's happening to me. I don't want to leave. I don't want to say no. I just want support, and that's okay. And some call and say, I need to get out right now, and then we help coordinate escapes. Even for those who have been taken overseas, unfortunately, for a forced marriage, we work with the State Department to help bring them back to the U.S. and back to safety.
That is fascinating, yes. And you are doing really good work.
Thank
really
you so
good
much.
Work.
Yeah, thank you, Freddie, for stopping by and explaining this to us. Yeah, we appreciate it.